Okay, Boker Tov, we can get started. Welcome this, I guess, special class on the Rambam and the Ramban. I think it was 3 weeks ago. That's what I advertised the class. I don't even remember exactly how much we did the Rambam and the Ramban thing. I know it was very little because I know we're discussing all kinds of other things about Spain. So I figured we're going to just try to give a few thoughts. Please ask any questions. Obviously, this is going to be just slight selection here and there to study both the Ramban and the Ramban. You need many classes and a long time. Really, it's a lifetime of study. I think the Rambam, more than any other Jewish thinker or Jewish personality is studied more than anybody else. Basically, and you can get a PhD on Maimonides on the Rambam in any university in the world, pretty much. And there's a lot to say, but we'll try to highlight some points and try to highlight some differences between the Rambam and the Ramban. And freely, if you have any questions, because we can go in a lot of different directions, I'm happy to take any questions you might have. But we can start with some of the biographical information just to sort of put them into place. So, who's older? It's always I don't know if the name any spot. Who's older, the Rambam or the Ramban? Anybody want to guess? You have a 50-50 chance. People are
The
afraid.
Rambam,
Rambam,
the Rambam is older.
The Rambam. So how much older is the Rambam?
about 100 years.
Okay.
About 100 years or so.
Yeah, it's about it's less than 60, I think. But okay. We used to think, scholars used to think, you may have seen this in a lot of books you've read, the Rambam was born in 1135. But the last 10 years or so, they have evidence basically from the writings of the Rambam. So he's actually born in 1138. It doesn't really matter. I mean, for us, he's born in 1135, 1138. All it just means is that he wrote his commentary on the mission 3 years when he was 3 years younger. We used to think he wrote it in his mid-20s or something, whatever. But the Rambam was born in 1138 in in Cordoba, which we were there a few weeks ago in Cordoba, Spain, and there's a statue of the Rambam, and he dies in Fostat, which is basically Cairo, or a suburb of Cairo in 1204. The Ramban is born in 1194. So how many years is that? 38 to 6 to whatever, 56 years later. The Ramban is born in Girona, which is northern Spain. It's not even really Spain. It's Catalonia. Even today, they want to separate a little bit from Spain. It's sort of a different area of Spain, but it's what we consider the north of Spain. Cordoba is in the south of Spain. How far are they apart? A good 500 miles, maybe more. The one flight we did on this trip, we fly from Granada, which is not too far from Cordoba, maybe not so close, to Barcelona. Girona is about 45-minute drive today from Barcelona. And so, it's in the north of Spain, and he dies in 1271 in the land of Israel. So they're a half a generation apart. They never met. I mean, because by 1194, the Rambam is long gone from Spain, and it's a different world. The Rambam is born in Muslim Spain, and the Ramban is born in Christian Spain. The Muslims conquered Spain in 711. They crossed from Morocco, just 11 miles apart from the bottom of Spain to the top of Morocco. Is about 11 miles across the Straits of Gibraltar. And the Muslims came in, and within 2-3 years, they conquered all of Spain. They got actually close to France. And then for the next 700 years, the Christians were reconquering Spain. And they finished the reconquest in 1492. That's why 1492, the Jews are expelled from Spain. But it took many hundreds of years. But by the 1100s already, the northern part of Spain was under Christian domination. And that, of course, makes a difference. If you live under Christians or Muslims, as I think we all know, throughout most of Jewish history, you've wanted to live under Muslims, not under Christians. Today, it's a different world, unfortunately, whatever. But in the Middle Ages, the Muslims were much more tolerant of Jews. Christians much less, so we had killed their God, at least way of thinking, and therefore they had much harsher rules. But again, things vary from place to place and from ruler to ruler, etc. It's not one condition all the time. There were times it was better under Christians, Christian leaders were not so bad, and there were times it was worse, and there were times Muslim leaders, as the Rambam himself was a victim of Islamic radicalism. In 1148, when the Rambam now is 10 years old and supposed to being a bar mitzvah, when the Almohides, this is like Al Qaeda or their ISIS of the day, came into Spain. So they forced Jews to convert or to kill them. So we know that much more in Christian thing. You could convert or die. So the Rambam's family fled. It's according to according to scholarship, the Rambam's family also converted to Islam. And of course, the Rambam in a famous letter writes that one is allowed to convert to Islam to save one's life. Unlike Christianity, which believes in the Trinity, in three gods, and is idolatry, Islam is not idolatrous. They believe in one God. We know Muslims today consider Christians to be idolaters. And so the Rambam's family apparently converted to save their life. And then they escaped to Morocco, to Fez. And then the Rambam eventually makes himself to Egypt. He stops in Israel and he moves to Egypt. And of course, in Egypt, he becomes a medical doctor. Maybe it's a little before. Why does the Rambam become a medical doctor? When he decided to go to medical school. I don't think they had medical school the same way we did.
To make a living.
Yeah, why do you have to make a living?
Because his brother passed away.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Everybody's very smart here. I don't have to, right? So his brother died. It's hard to know, especially what exactly people know. So I don't want to assume knowledge, but I also don't want to repeat things that people are familiar with. So we'll quickly go through. The Rambam's brother supported him. The Rambam died. He died, and the Rambam needed a means of support. And I really decided I'm not going to do any sources, but I'll show you one source, which maybe some of you have seen, but just to see it in the Rambam, it's like rather striking and rather harsh. And let's just say that today most people assume we don't follow this Rambam, as you'll see in one moment. So let me just share my screen for 1 minute, and we'll take a look at the source quickly, and I'll explain why the Rambam went to work. Okay, let's go here. Why is this not opening? Oh, share. Okay, here we go. Okay, everybody see this? Okay, this is the Rambam, chapter 3 in Hilchot Talmud Torah. It's very interesting. The laws of how to learn. You can't just learn Torah. They're laws. There's a whole systematic approach that one is supposed to approach the study of Torah. So the Rambam here writes in chapter 3, halacha 10. Kol hamesim al libo sheyasak b'Torah v'lo yaseh melacha. Somebody who thinks he puts on his heart, he's going to involve in Torah, engage in Torah, and he's not going to work. The parnes min hatstaka, and he'll collect charity from the hareza chilel at Hashem. This is a desecration of God's name. Ubizat Torah. He ridicules the Torah. Ukaiva maor hadat. I don't know why this happens. I'm still on my Israeli system. Okay, and he turns out kiva lechavot. He turns off the light of Torah. Okay. Well, v'garam ra'al la'atzmo, he causes evil to himself. V'natal chayav min olam haba, he removes his life from the world to come. Lefisha asur lehanot midivrei Torah be'olam hazeh, because one is prohibited from benefiting from Torah in this world. Amru chachamim, in other words, a physical benefit. Amru chachamim, kol hananeh midivrei Torah, one who derives some kind of material benefit from Torah. Natal chayav min olam, he removes his life from this world. What sivu v'amru, our rabbis have commanded, al taseh atara likadel bam v'lo kardom lachbor. You can't make them like an act. You can't make Torah as a way to get ahead in life. Torah is to be humbled. You can't use it as, oh, I'm a Torah scholar, therefore I should get X, Y, and Z. What sivu v'amru, our rabbis commanded us, ahovet hamalacha, love work, usnat harabanud, and hate lording over people. In other words, which the Rambam here is interpreting, to use your Torah as a way to be on top of other people. Torah this is, of course, from Pirkei Avot. Any Torah that doesn't have work, sofa b'teila, will in the end become nullified, because as our sages teach, if you don't work, well, okay, you'll teach how to be a thief. That's sort of a separate idea. But the Rambam says if you just have Torah, your Torah will go away. And it causes sin. He's going to steal, right? So the Rambam is alluding to the Gemara that I didn't explain now, that the Rambam says that there are, the Gemara in Kiddushin says that a father has to teach their children 6 things. There's 6 obligations from a father to a child. Anybody want to list them off? Our great Talmidei Chachamim here. Who wants to lift off the 6 things a father must do? And it's interesting today. I say father because that's how the Gemara explains it. That it's not really technical obligation on the mother. But okay, we'll leave today. I would think mothers would be involved and should be involved. But what are the 6 obligations of a father?
To teach them to swim.
That's the 6th one, maybe, right? But Yesh Omrim, and some say to teach how to swim. Excellent.
Teach them a trade. Teach them a trade.
Yeah, to teach a trade, right? Okay, so let's go in order. The
Torah.
It's
Teach them Torah.
Sorry?
Teach them Torah.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, so we have 3 of them. Teach Torah, teach trade, to teach swimming. Good. What are the other 3? The other two of them are simple. A brit milah. If you have a son, the father's obligated to do a brit milah. A pidyon
To find him a shidduch. To find
him a shidduch. Excellent, and to marry them off. So that's it. Those are the obligations. And then the Gemara says, so one of them is to teach your child a trade. And the Gemara says, quote, if you don't teach your child a trade, you teach him how to steal. So the Gemara says, you teach him how to steal. So what do we teach him how to steal? You says because if he doesn't have a trade, he's going to have to cheat on his taxes. He's going to have to use the black market. If a person doesn't have a means of support, and I remember when I was in yeshiva in Israel, and when I was like 18 years old, I remember our Rabbi telling us, I was in yeshiva Hakotel, that based on this Gemara, you have an obligation to go to university today, because you cannot get a good job without going to university. That's what he said. Anyways, but however you want to interpret. So that's what the Rambam is saying. According to Rambam, you're not allowed to take money for the study of Torah. Not allowed to take money. You lose your share in the world to come. So this is one of the sort of extreme positions of the Rambam. Now, the Rambam does have a counter, I would say, another thing people point to that you can, how Shevet Levi is supposed to learn Torah all the time, etc. But so I don't want to get into that. That's really talking about certain people as a community. There are, in other words, that Rambam is talking about anybody in the world who wants to dedicate himself to Torah. That's a beautiful thing, but that's very different from taking the communal funds. If your brother is supporting you, gesundheit, your brother wants to support you to learn Torah, that's great. But what the Rambam is talking about, I'm going to take money from the community. We call today a kolel system. So the Rambam was very adamantly opposed to it. Okay, there are lots of things we don't follow in the Rambam. The Rambam was, I don't want to call him an extremist. The Rambam was the great, talks about the golden mean, how important it is to be a moderate. The Rambam talks, it's very, except for 2 character traits. A Jew should always be a moderate. It's based on Aristotle. The Rambam, of course, loved Aristotle, and the Rambam, based on Aristotle, have this that you have to go in the middle. You shouldn't spend too much money, but you shouldn't save every penny. Don't worry to spend. How can I spend money? I can go out. No, it's okay to spend money. It's okay to enjoy. You have to find, the Rambam always says, you have to find the middle ground. There are 2 exceptions to the middle ground. What anybody know what they are? Anger, number 1. Yes, good, very good. You should never be angry. It's not like, okay, I get angry a little bit, or, if I'm pressed. Good, anger, should never get angry. And even when you have to feign anger occasionally, but never really get angry. Number 2, humility. Mo'od havish shval ruach. Should be very, very humble. That's the Rambam. But the Rambam had, when I say he's an extremist, he has very sharp views, the Rambam. And the Rambam, had probably the most, I would, it's interesting. I came home, I've been away for 33 days. It's the longest I've been away, I think, since I married. When we got married, we spent our first year in Israel. I haven't been away for so long, in over 30 years. I spent the last five Shabbatot in 5 different countries. And it was nice. Every Kabbalah Shabbos was different, had its own minhagim. Okay, we can talk about that then. On other times. So I got home. I haven't even gone through all my mail yet. Don't ask, but we got the last flight out on Swiss Air from Israel on Thursday night. And then we flew there are no direct flights from Israel to Canada anymore. And so we had to connect through Europe, and I had to be in Israel on Thursday. My uncle's unveiling and whatever. So there was only the late flights, Swiss Air. And then we flew on Friday, Air Canada. And I walked into the house at 5:15. I was in shul by 7 o'clock. By 7:03, okay, for that. I was 3 minutes late for Minion on Friday night, but often I'm later than 3 minutes late when I'm here. So I actually was doing pretty well. Okay, so but my issue of
Well,
tradition was in the mail. So I ripped open the cover so I could read it a little on Shabbos. So I see there's an article, there's a book review. Menachem Kellner has a book review of a recent book called Kitvei Rambam. I haven't read the whole review yet, but I just began it. And there's an Art Scroll just put out a 500-page book on the Rambam called Kitvei Rambam. So he wrote, it's a long review, and he wrote in many ways, this is like, it's revolutionary, but quite traditional. There was Art Scroll, the Rambam is a very controversial figure. I think everybody here knows that. And the Rambam has certain views that today are considered, heresy in the Orthodox world. The Rambam had some very, fascinating views, and those views are generally ignored. How many people here have read the Moreh Nevuchim? Anybody? The Guide to the Perplexed. Oh, I'm very.
Yes.
We really have a okay. You guys should be giving the class, not me. We have a very okay. So, but in yeshivas they don't study the Moreh Nevuchim, etc. So he's writing that the Rambam was in part of what he writes, and what he says is the Art Scroll doesn't present it this way. Art Scroll, he has a lot of praise actually for what they do, but he also says they've got to fit sort of the Art Scroll view of things. So the Rambam is just one of many great Rishonim, one of many great medieval authorities, but they don't see him as sort of I have a unique, and he called as an intellectual elitist. The Rambam was an intellectual elitist. If you weren't on the highest level of intellect, the world to come is not for you, and that's part of the 13 principles of faith. One of the most strangest things in the Rambam, I find one of the strangest things in the Rambam is the Rambam, what makes a good Jew? So what makes a good Jew? I would think he keeps the mitzvot of the Torah. He gives tzedakah, he doesn't gossip, he's honest in business, and keeps kosher, that's also important, and Shabbos, but he keeps the mitzvot bein adam lechaviro and bein adam lemakom. With the fact that he believes that certain conceptions about God, that's an effect if you're a good person or not. But according to the Rambam, if you can be the biggest tzaddik in the world, never talk a word of lashon hara, never gossip, the most honest person, but you happen to believe God has a body, which is what a large contingent of Jews believed in the Middle Ages, that God had a body. You know why they believe God has a body? Because that's what it says in the Torah. Because it says in the Torah, God has eyes. The eyes of the Lord are looking. God has an arm, Yad Chazaka. He has his Ron Nituya. It's all over the Torah that God has a body. Why shouldn't God have a body? So to us, that's so ridiculous because the Rambam won the day. The Rambam so convinced the world that the idea of God having a body is ridiculous that nobody today believes God has a body. But as the Ravid writes, to the Rambam, people greater than you, Mr. Rambam, believe that God had a body. When the Rambam writes, a person who believes that God has a body loses their share in the world to come, the Rabbi gets all upset at the Rambam. He says, Mr. Rambam, he says, Gedolim v'Rabbi mimcha, people greater than you thought that God has a body, according to what they read, the psukim in the Torah. And all the commentaries point that the Ravid agrees with the Rambam, that God does not have a body. The Ravid wasn't arguing. What the Ravid was arguing is that you say the person loses their word to come. What, are you crazy? Doesn't make you a heretic. Okay, he believes that God has a body. Oh, right, so what? That's what it says in the Torah. That's the pshat of the psukim. So the Rambam, we interpret it not according to the pshat, the plain meaning. Okay, but it doesn't make you a heretic. But the Rambam had very strong views about everything. The Rambam had extremely strong views about anything that he did. So the Rambam calls such a person a heretic. They lose a share in the word come. He can be the most righteous person in the world. The Rambam sees Olam Haba as I don't know how to put it. As graduate school, as getting a PhD, becoming a Rhodes Scholar. You want to get a PhD at Cambridge, whatever. The Rambam says the person who is a tzaddik, but doesn't hold from all 13 of my principles of faith. I'm just using God having a body as one example, and where the Ravid attacks him. But if you don't believe every word in the Torah was given, the Torah that we have today is the exact same Torah as Moshe Rabbeinu, which many people don't believe that it's exactly the same. then you lose your share in the world. I believe that. I don't think so. I think I believe there's certain, yeah, Rabbi Huda Hachasid said certain psukim were added by David HaMelech. I mean, we had Rishonim, many Rishonim who said that. The Gemara quotes a view that the last 8 psukim were written by Yoshua. According to the Rambam, that's heresy. So you have all these ideas. You lose your share in the world to come. If you're an adulterer and a child abuser and you eat cheeseburgers on Shabbos, but you believe in the 13 principles of faith, then go to the world to come. It's like ridiculous. The Rambam wouldn't say that's ridiculous. The Rambam says, because the world to come is an intellectual place. And that's what Menachem Kellner is pointing out. It was an intellectual elitist. And the intellect, yes, the Rambam said he gets punished, the adulterer gets punished, blah, blah, blah. But after he goes through his punishments, then he can go to the world to come. But if you're not, it's like if you can be the nicest guy in the world, but if you don't get an A+ in organic chemistry, you can't get into medical school. Like that's just the way it is. You got to ace your MCATs. I know they still have MCATs to get into medical school. I don't know, whatever. But you got to do chemistry and you can't get into medical school. I know you're a nice guy. Medical school is not for nice people. Medical school is for people who understand medicine. Olam Haba is not for nice people. Olam Haba is for people who have a philosophical appreciation of God. So this is a pretty radical view, but that's the view of the Rambam. Again, people don't talk about it so much. Obviously, many people disagree with the Rambam. The Rambam's view on the Mashiach is also radical in the opposite direction, right? The Rambam believes the Mashiach, I don't want to say it's no big deal, it's a very big deal. But the only difference between our world and Mashiach, I'm sure many people know, especially here, is peace. That's it. And no miracles. People are going to die. Nothing's going to change in the Messianic era, except there'll be peace, which is why the Lubavitcher Rebbe could say in the Gulf War, and the world was becoming democratic and the Iron Curtain fall, that we're ushering in the Mashiach. Well, I'm not talking about all the Lubavitch Messianism, forget all that. But the idea that the Rebbe said it's a Messianic era, he based on the Rambam, he was right. 30 years ago, the world was a very different place than it is today. I mean, fortunately for them, but unfortunately for us. So the idea of the Iron Curtain, democracy, ain't shibud malchiyot. That's their word. Their only difference is the oppression of the nations, meaning you have dictatorships. Shibud malchiyot is the king oppresses the people. In democracy, the people have freedoms. That's a very easy interpretation. When the world becomes truly democratic, that's the mess, and there's peace. It's very almost unheard of. Maybe Argentina and England, Auckland, maybe the only example in history where 2 democracies went to war with each other. Democracies don't go to war with each other. So when you have democracies, that's right. Correct me if I'm wrong. I may be wrong. I think the Falkland Islands.
Argentina was ruled by the generals. The war, the Falklands War, took down the regime, and then they got democracy.
Oh, so it wasn't even 2 democracies. Thank you for that correction around the Falklands War. Okay, anyways, so that's why the Lubavitcher Rebbe could say, and we know Lubavitch is very into the Rambam. They do Rambam Yomi. You study the Rambam. I'll get to your question in 1 second, Yocheved. This is a cute thing. I've mentioned this before. I'm sure people here know. How many chapters in the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam? There are 14 books. I don't know how much.
1,000?
1,000.
1,000. My understanding is Abram Geiger was the Reform rabbi, was the first one to discover. He was, I don't know, Reform, but in those days, Reform rabbi, the first one to discover that there are actually 1,000 chapters. The Rambam was an unbelievable organizer. It's not a coincidence. There are 1,000 chapters in the Rambam. And the 1,000th chapter is about the Messianic era. That's because that's the end. The Rambam goes from the beginning to the end. So, that's the view of the Rambam. That's so it can be the Lubavitch learn Rambam Yomi. They do 3 prakim a day, and they finish in every 3 years. They do the Rambam. Okay, Yocheved, what do you want to say?
Okay, so it's not a question, but since you mentioned Menachem Kellner, so he wrote a fascinating book called "Must a Jew Believe Anything?"
Yes, I have it. Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay, I happen to have it here too.
Oh, there you go. Okay, yes. We had Menachem Kellner. He's spoken on Torah in Motion. You can go look him up on the archives, right? But he wrote a couple of fascinating articles in tradition recently. So now he's doing this review. It's interesting. The issue of tradition is sitting there. So it's interesting. In this issue, they have about 7 book reviews. Like half the issue is on book reviews. I must
They
say,
do that once a year.
has done a wonderful job. Tradition was sort of a dormant magazine, and Jeffrey Sachs, who lives in Israel, is an Agnon scholar. He, among other things, so he took over the editorship of Tradition. I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, and he's really done an amazing job. So that's his book. I didn't even know that ArtScroll put up a book, 500 pages. They said it introduces him to the Mor Nevuchim, things like that. I have to read the whole review, but I caught the point when I was talking about it. As he puts it, he says they don't talk about the intellectual elitism of the Rambam because that makes the Rambam different. The Rambam and it's most people cannot reach the intellectual elite that the Rambam wants. In other words, the Rambam is, but I actually think it's Menachem Kellner who coined the phrase, and I think it's such a beautiful thing. Menachem Kellner, I think, says it half jokingly, but I assume like every joke, there's a seriousness to it. Could Maimonides get into the Olam Haba of the Rambam? Right, because Maimonides had many views that would be considered heretical. Obviously, the Maimonides and the Rambam are the same person, but Maimonides says it's like a cute line. Could Maimonides get into the Olam Haba of the Rambam? Because the Olam Haba of the Rambam is very hard to get into, and it has nothing to do with whether you're a tzaddik or Russia. That's one thing. It's not unimportant. That has nothing to do with Olam Haba. That's about Olam Haza. If you're a righteous person or a wicked person, Olam Haba is about intellectual perfection, and we know that. We know they're low lives who are whatever intellectual perfection.
Kelman?
Who are not connected, unfortunately. So, and the Rambam makes I think for us, well, why did my video go off? I think for us, that's a troubling distinction, right? And now it went off. Okay. Anyways, hopefully.
Rabbi Kelman.
Yes.
So I just wanted to mention for the people who have not read the book that even though we look at Kellner as, the expert on the Rambam, and he is, but what he argues here is that the 13 principles were a totally radical new idea in Judaism that he introduced,
100%.
and that at the end of the day, many did not accept it, but he said now in modern times it has become, it's in our siddur and it's become the party line. So it's just very interesting the way he.
Yeah. That's what you. Thank you very much. I thank you for mentioning, because to me it's so obvious I didn't even want to mention it, but maybe it's not so obvious. According to the yeshivish world, so to speak, the Rambam just. He didn't do any innovations. Like, of course, the 13 principles is based on, and he did. But according to many, there was a tremendous innovation. We never had faith, principles of faith. And it's not that Judaism doesn't have things you're supposed to believe in. It's just the idea that they become the foundational stone of Judaism was never an idea. Because first of all, how do you know what you believe in? That a Jewish court, a Jewish society doesn't work on belief. It works on action. What do you do? The court punishes what you believe in. That's between you and God, between you. That has nothing to do with anything. I mean, so the idea, and where does he come up with some of these? So as you know, but today the definition of orthodoxy, unfortunately, I think, is the fact that there's orthodoxy is probably going to get into trouble now. But would be much better if we'd be in a post-denominational age. It would be in the Sephardic world. I just traveled for 5 weeks, right? So I say all the time, one of the benefits of traveling when you go, I spent a Shabbos in Gibraltar, one in Budapest, one in Prague, one in Israel, and I was in Vienna, all these different places, in all different shuls, and you see that the way we were brought up, the Ashkenazic, I assume most of us here, it's not the only way. There are other approaches to Judaism that may seem radical to us. Gibraltar doesn't even say Kabbalah Shabbos on Friday night. They don't do Kabbalah Shabbos. They start at Mizmor LeDavid. They don't say L'chuna Rana. Big deal. Like, okay, so you learn the differences. The Sephardic world doesn't have orthodoxy, conservative reform. You have observant, non-observant Jews. Orthodoxy, as all the scholarship says, orthodoxy, like reform, is a reaction to modernity. When the Jewish community can no longer coerce people to belong to the group, orthodoxy was one response to modernity. It's connected to traditional Judaism, but it's not. And the Sephardic world doesn't have orthodox conservative reform, and the people who are not in the Sephardic world, by and large, they're less observant, more observant. Everybody goes to one shul, and it's very sad that we don't have that in our community, and it's not good, in my humble opinion. And but Orthodoxy is a 19th century invention. But anyway, so Orthodoxy of today is defined with whether you believe the 13 principles of faith. That's why somebody can be today, maybe it's different. The conservative movement has changed so much, but everybody knows the Jewish Theological Seminary had people who were extremely very learned, but they would, no Orthodox rabbi would use them as a witness at a wedding because they teach at JTS, they must be apikorsim. What do you mean they're apikorsim? They're Shomer Shabbos, they keep kosher, the woman covered their hair, the mechitza, when Shaul Lieberman was at JTS, the minyan had a mechitza. So they have that parts of the Torah added later, and there are 2 books of Yeshayahu and whatever. Okay, and but today that's become the idea that if you believe the Torah was not given word for word that we have in the Rambam, so you become an apikoros. So that's why Mark Shapiro wrote his book on the 13 principles of faith, where he goes through. We just traveled with Mark for 3 weeks. He was running, our 2 trips we did back to back, Spain and Central Europe. So he wrote a book showing all the people who either disagree with the principle of faith. In other words, the Rambam is wrong. It's not true that the Torah we have today is the same Torah we got. It's 98% true. But according to the Rambam, if one letter is different, you're an apikoros. But some of them are true, but it's not a fundamental notion of faith. Let's say you don't. I don't know if people say, I don't remember now, but let's say one of the principles of faith is Moshe is the greatest of all prophets. So let's say you believe Moshe was a great prophet, but not necessarily the greatest prophet. So does that make you? So according to the Rambam, you lose your share in the world to come? I don't know. So somebody might say, I agree, Moshe is the greatest prophet in the world, but you don't lose your share in the world for come. You don't become a heretic because you don't believe that. Or let's say, I know you hear sometimes somebody says, the miracle of Hanukkah never happened, right? Somebody told me recently, I don't want to mention names, but Rabbi Aaron Adler, some of you may know him from Israel. We had him here in our house a few months ago, and he just wrote a book on the Rambam, fascinating book on the Rambam that he gave me in Hebrew. And I was a little shocked. It was a little bit heretical, and he was a very close student of Rav Soloveitchik, and he's a very prominent sort of rabbi in the modern Orthodox world in Israel. Rabbi Adler made Aliyah many years ago. I founded a yeshiva in Akiva, but he writes certain things on the Rambam that the Rambam, changed. It was very, very. I wrote him, whoa, I'm a little surprised. Doesn't this go against what Rav Soloveitchik believes? So we had a whole discussion about it. So one of the things he told me is that somebody left Yeshiva University. I won't mention his name because who's a very frum person. Most of you have probably heard of him, so I don't want to mention his name. And I never heard this before about him, that he left Yeshiva University because he said that the miracle of Hanukkah is first recorded like 500 years after the story. In other words, in all the original sources of Hanukkah, nobody mentions the miracle of the oil. They mention the war and the reestablishment of Jewish sovereignty, but nobody mentions the oil. That never comes up till hundreds of years later, and maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's not historically true. Today, you say that you consider an apikoros, but even according to the Rambam, you're not an apikoros. It's not one of the 13 principles of faith to believe that the oil lasted for 8 days. So I don't know. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying anything, but I don't think that. But today, if you got up in a yeshiva and you said that, they'd throw you out. They call you an apikoros. What do you mean? Even according to the Rambam, you're not an apikoros. That didn't make it to the 13 principles of faith. So many of the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam, other people say, it's very nice. I agree with you, Rambam, but it's not a principle of faith. I don't lose my share in the world to come. But so Mark Shapiro wrote this book, last word, and as far as I know, I've never seen a lot of people were upset at him for writing the book because it's sort of what do you mean? The Rambam wasn't right, or people disagree with the Rambam? Isn't this a basis of being an Orthodox Jew, the 13 principles of faith? And his point of writing is just to make it aware that other people disagree. He's not taking an opinion. He just wants you to know that the Ravid doesn't think you're an apikoros if you believe God has a body. People should know that. People should know that. Whatever.
Rabbi
Yes.
Kelman.
Yeah.
My father-in-law, Allah Hashem, he was at YU for 3 years. At that time, they didn't have enough family work. Went to JIR, which was conservative. Now, of course, it's reformed. And, people wouldn't come into the shul. When he had Reagan for lunch, you can bet yourself that every frum rabbi took a front seat in that auditorium, to hear what he had to say. And when he came to Yom Kippur War, He locked the doors in the back. He said, no one's leaving till we raise the money. But I'm saying he did more family work. That was the time at why you didn't.
Yes, no. Why? Listen,
and I still
why?
mention names. His name is Rabbi Morris Friedman.
Oh, Rabbi Morris Friedman. Hold on a second. He wasn't. I know the name, but I have to talk later. Yeah. He. Okay. How many? You're going back a long time now, right? In the 50s.
Right. That's why they weren't equipped with the real family stuff. People locking.
Was he involved in the tshuva on driving on Shabbos?
No.
Oh, wasn't he? Wasn't. Okay, that's somebody. Okay, fine. But thank you. Yeah, listen, I'm not getting. There's not a thing on the whole history of conservative and orthodox and why you sending rabbis to conservative shuls, of course. But all I'm pointing out, it's much more complicated. Yocheved is 100% right. Today, orthodoxy is defined by adherence to the 13 principles. So therefore, you can have a Mechal Shabbos who drives to an orthodox shul. They'll treat him with greater respect than the frum rabbi of a conservative shul. You understand what I mean? Now, there's someone who's a conservative rabbi or a conservative Jew. We don't really have those anymore. But if 40 years ago, we had Jews who went to conservative shuls, who didn't drive on Shabbos, who kept kosher, put on tefillin every day. A different world than it was today. Whatever, for whatever reasons, they were members in conservative shuls. They're much more observant that the guy who drives the shul of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to the Orthodox shul. Oh, he's Orthodox. What do you mean he's Orthodox? But goes to an Orthodox shul. So that's whatever. That's the community we live in. Okay, there's so much to discuss. Let's do a little bit more. And I have to talk on the Ramban a little. Believe me, we could do this for the whole year. And I'm not an expert on the Rambam. I mean, I read a lot of the Rambam, whatever, but there are people greater than I, who know much more than I do. But one more thing I'll just quote on the Rambam, and another very controversial aspect of the Rambam is his writing of the Mishnah Torah. The Rambam, I don't have to tell you, the Rambam wrote the Mishnah Torah. Why did he write the Mishnah Torah? What's the main? I mean, there are a variety of reasons. If you want to know a lot about this, who one of the world's experts, of course, there are many experts on the Rambam, but one of the original world's experts academically on the Rambam, of course, was Isidore Twersky, professor at Harvard, he was a student of Wolfson, of Harry Wolfson, I believe, who survived the war, was a great Gaon, and then went to Harvard. And Isidore Twersky then was the head of the Department of Near Eastern Studies, I believe that's what it's called, at Harvard University. And many people who we know who got PhDs at Harvard, including Mark Shapiro. Mark Shapiro was the last person to get his PhD before he became sick. Isidore Twersky passed away relatively young, probably about 30 years ago. And he was, of course, the son-in-law of Rav Soloveitchik. One son-in-law is Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. The other son-in-law is Rav Yitzchak Twersky, who was the Talmud Rebbe on Shabbos, the Hasidic Rebbe in a shtiva with the Bekashe, and is a professor at Harvard University. And Isidore Twersky wrote the monumental work on the Rambam, on the code of the Rambam. Really a fascinating and very important work, but 500 pages, whatever it is. And of course, he analyzes why did the Rambam write the Mishnah Torah? What were the goals of the Rambam? So one of them was anti-Karaite. He was attacking the Karaites. Okay, for Seder. But let's say what the Rambam writes himself in his introduction. Why does the Rambam call his book the Mishnah Torah?
Wanted to replace the Gemara, really.
Right, because it's the second Torah, like the Mishnah, right? You don't need the Gemara anymore. And this is what the Rambam writes. I always say, and I remember one of my high school teachers telling me, when you're learning yeshiva, the brisker, whatever, what do they do? A contradiction in the Rambam. This is a shvera Rambam, a difficult Rambam, and they sit there and they break their heads to figure out the Rambam. What did Rav Soloveitchik do? Oh, the Rambam this, and analyzing every word in the Rambam. I remember a high school teacher telling me the most difficult Rambam of all is the Rambam when he writes in his introduction. He's writing this book so you can take a chumash, read the Tanakh, and then read my book. And you don't need anything else in between. You don't need the Mishnah, and you don't need Midrashim, and the Sifri, and the Sifra, and the Bavli, and the Yerushalmi. You don't need any of that stuff. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, and therefore, I'm not giving you any sources, because it doesn't matter. My way or the highway, I'm right. You don't need to check it out. Unlike any other quote, he doesn't quote any other sources. He doesn't quote dissenting opinions. Often in the Shulchan Aruch, which some say this, some say that, right? And then you have to figure out which one are you supposed to do, or really both are legitimate, whatever. The Rambam, this is it, and he called it the Mishnah Torah, and that people didn't like that so much. Why do you do that? Because you have to know the halacha, but then you can spend the rest of your life studying philosophy. The Talmud, you got to know, you got to know what's kosher. But okay, so you learn quickly. I'll give you the bottom line, what's kosher. and now go and study philosophy. Go study Aristotle and Plato and see how it's done Judaism. And Usher doesn't like what I'm saying. How come?
Not at all. I've read the words, and I don't think he said what you claim he says.
Okay, so I'm happy. I'll tell you what, I appreciate that. After I finish, we're going to take a look at the words of the Rambam. I don't want to spend time right now, but when we finish the class, let's say at 10:15 or so, we will take a look at the words of the Rambam in the introduction, and then people can judge for themselves if my interpretation is correct. And I thank you for that. It's always important. Never believe anything I say. I try to say what the truth is as I understand it. But yes, absolutely, you can. Sometimes I'm giving an interpretation. That's why I often like to show you the sources inside. I don't always show the sources. So Usher, we will take a look and we'll see. Thank you for that. Okay.
And I also disagree about your exposition of his attitude towards Aristotle. I think that's usually misinterpreted, and it's because when people read Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, and especially from beginning in the second parak and going through, most people can't read it. They don't understand it because it makes no sense to the modern mind.
Right. It's hard. The guide is very esoteric, and there's the Rambam say what he really means. He says he's going to hide part of his meaning. Correct. And however little I know about the Rambam, I know less about on the Moreh Nevuchim, his philosophical, right? So that I can't I show you the source, but the Rambam, all the scholars say the Rambam was greatly influenced by Aristotle. Rav Soloveitchik wanted to do his PhD at University of Berlin on Plato and the Rambam. That was the Rav's initial goal, to write on Plato, not on Aristotle, Plato on the Rambam. And this is what I was told. I never spoke to Soloveitchik about this. This is what I was told. I wanted to do Plato on the Rambam. And there was nobody at the University of Berlin who was capable of overseeing such a PhD. You need a professor who knows something about this. And so he did, of course, on Hermann Cohen, the modern German philosopher Hermann Cohen. That's what he ended up doing his PhD. But he didn't do it on Plato, because what I was told is everybody talks about Aristotle on the Rambam. So the Rav wanted to show the influence of Plato on the Rambam. Okay, I don't know enough about Plato, Aristotle, Rambam. Okay, but let's spend a few minutes on the Ramban, and then we'll wrap up. And I hope you get a few tidbits out of it, things to think about, and some ideas. Okay, the Ramban was very different than the Rambam. The Rambam is the great rationalist. The Ramban, I say, is born 1194 in Gerona under Christian influence. He lives basically his entire life in Spain, except the last 4 years of his life, which we'll get to, when he moves to Israel in 1267. And I always say the Rambam comes to Israel. I always tell the story of my late friend and roommate Michael Levenstein, who from Toronto I grew up with, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. So I've mentioned the story before, but we were visiting him once in Israel, and it was Friday afternoon, and he was driving us back to where we were staying for Shabbat. He was living in Ramot at the time, and he was driving us back. And we got into a big traffic jam, like 2:00 Friday afternoon. So I said, traffic, what's going on here? Why traffic jam? And he turned to me and he said, how the Ramban would have loved to get into a traffic jam. What if Ramban can get in a traffic jam? I said, well, that's why you're living in Israel and I'm living in Toronto. The Ramban comes to Israel and he can't get a minyan in Yerushalayim. So whenever I'm now in Israel and you get in a traffic jam, I think of the Ramban, how the Ramban would say, Baruch Hashem, I'm in a traffic jam. Everything is attitude. You can look at things attitude. Anyways, so the Ramban, is I want to discuss, since we only have a few minutes, I want to discuss the Ramban as a peacemaker. The Ramban, he tried to bring peace. Remember the Maimonidean controversy, when they burn his books, it burst out in the open in 1232. The Rambam dies in 1204. And remember, I didn't say this, but people may know, the only book the Rambam wrote in Hebrew is the Mishnah Torah. We're talking about his book of Jewish. Everything else written in Judeo-Arabic and Arabic, because, like we write in English. If you're writing to the people, you write in, and you want the average person, you write in the Arabic, in German, and French. So he wrote in Arabic. But the Mishnah Torah was the Rambam's constitution of the Jewish state. That's a 1,000 chapters. He writes about Jewish law that didn't even apply. The temple, we want to have a temple. We're going to have a temple. We're going to follow what the Rambam writes. So so that had to be in Hebrew. But everything else the Rambam wrote in Arabic. No, he wrote in Arabic. So unless you lived in an Arabic-speaking country, you didn't know what he was writing. So but by 1232, the translations of his work reached France, where it was a different culture than in Spain. And the rabbis read the Rambam, and their hair stood on edge. And they said, this person is a total heretic. And they burned his books. And one of the people who burned his books is the brother-in-law of the Ramban, Nachmanides' brother-in-law, Rabbeinu Yonah. And that's in 1232. And in 1240, we're going to read this on Tisha B'Av, Sha'alis Rufa Be'esh, in Paris, where the Olympics are being held right now, and they took 24, I don't want to say truckloads, but whatever, they took 24 massive things of all the Jewish manuscripts they can gather, and they burnt them in the city in Paris. And there were books that are totally lost, and the people thought the Gemara might be lost. They didn't have so many manuscripts. There's no printing press. You burn books. Wow, that's a big deal. And that was a terrible, terrible thing. And the Maram of Rutenberg composed this kina on the burning of the books, and I think it was Rabbeinu Yonah did tshuva then on the Rambam. He said, this is a punishment that we burned the books of the Rambam, so now they're burning our books. And they were very upset. The Ramban tried to make peace in this battle. The Ramban basically agreed with the people who were appalled by the Rambam. To give you one example, again, the Ramban recognized the Rambam's great, but he also said things that are unacceptable. So one of the things that the Rambam said that is unacceptable is that when the three angels or whatever, three malachim come to visit Abraham and tell them Sarah's going to have a baby and to rescue Lot, etc. That wasn't, angels don't come to people. That's ridiculous if you're a rationalist. So that was a dream. Avram Avinu had a dream, and they appeared to him in a dream. And in this dream, this is what happened. And Yaakov Avinu has this fight at night with the messenger of God. What are you talking about? That's a dream. That's a dream. So that's what the Rambam writes. So people, this is heresy. They didn't have the 13 principles of the Rambam. They had their own definition of it. This is heresy to say such a thing. How could the Rambam dare say this? And the Ramban comes this close to calling the Rambam a heretic for saying this. He doesn't cross that line, but the Rambam was very upset at the Rambam, but he tried to make peace and to defend the Rambam, that there shouldn't be this war against the Rambam. He gets very quickly. Two other things that he did was even though it's just, I don't know how often he does, I think in the opening the opening of the Mishnah Torah. So the Rambam wrote an introduction to the Mishnah Torah. I don't mean the introduction we're going to take a look at with Usher in a moment, his 2-page introduction about, why he wrote Mishnah Torah, but he wrote a whole book as an introduction to the Mishnah Torah. And that introduction is, people don't realize necessarily it's an introduction, but it's called Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of mitzvot, and that's the Rambam listing of the 613 mitzvot. Now, you have to realize the Gemara never lists 613 mitzvot. The Gemara never really even mentions 613 mitzvot. It does mention it in 2 Agadic passages in passing, never as a serious discussion. But the Gemara mentions in Makot, Torah Tziva Lenu Moshe, the Gemara twice in non-legal discussions mentions 613 mitzvot. But there's no list. The Gemara it's not something that occupied the stages of the Talmud, the 613 mitzvot. The first listing ever of the 613 mitzvot is not till the 8th century, a couple hundred years after the closing of the Talmud by the Bahag. He's one of the Balei, the Gaonim Bal Halachot Gedolot. It's one of the first books written after the conclusion of the Talmud, and he, in his introduction, lists off the 613 mitzvot. And that started this whole genre of Sefer Mitzvah. We are most famous Sefer Achinuch, the listing. As I've mentioned before, we do not today, there is no agreed upon listing of the 613 mitzvot. It's not for now, I think other times, but I'll mention who cares. Well, what difference does it make? We have 5 million mitzvot. What do you mean 613 mitzvot? What does it really matter? That's for another discussion, but whatever, we all know 613 mitzvot, but we don't have an agreed upon list. So the Rambam made his own list. And because the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, the 1,000 chapters of the Mishnah Torah and the Rambam, is basically an elaboration of the 613 mitzvot. If you look in the Rambam, and before every series of laws, whether it's Hilchot Staka, Hilchot Shabbos, Hilchot Tefillah, the Rambam always tells you how many mitzvot there are. He writes there are 4 mitzvot here, there are 11. Avodah Zarah, there are 51 of the 613 mitzvot in the Rambam's calculation relate to idolatry. And he'll write them each like 3 words each, 3-4 words each, list off the 51 mitzvot, or the 1 mitzvah in Hilchot Shuvah. There's 1 mitzvah, or 2 mitzvot in Hilchot Tefillah. And he'll run them, and then he'll write Ubiur mitzvot, Elu bebrakim, and the explanation of these mitzvot is in the chapters that follow. So what the Mishnah Torah is really an explanation of the 613 mitzvot. So the Rambam first wrote an introduction, wrote a book. What are the 613 mitzvot? But before he could write the 613 mitzvot, he had to give you his principles. How does he determine? I've said this before. If I gave you Parsha Kitetse, or any parsha, but let's say Kitetse, that is the most mitzvot. There's 74 mitzvot in Kitetse, and I gave it to you, and I even told you the number. Let's say if I didn't tell you the number, it'd be worse. You tell me, what are the mitzvot here? Yesterday's parsha, Matot Maseh. How many mitzvot in the Torah in Matot Maseh? 253 psukim, right? Read through it. Tell me, what are the 6? It would be an amazing exercise. I've never done this. Go through Parsha Mishpat and Gosh and just write what you think the mitzvot of the Torah are. It will be next to impossible. What's for all time? It's not so simple at all. So the Rambam had to tell you, these are my guiding principles. How do I figure out? And he has to make it to 613. That's the Friedberg's work on the Gershom. Why 613? Do we whatever? It makes himself into like a pretzel. How do we fit all the mitzvot into 613? So the Rambam gives you 14 principles. 14 limiting principles. So the most important limiting principle is if something is not written black and white in the Chumash, it's not one of the 613 mitzvot. So the 39 malachot of Shemesh are not written in the Chumash. They're derived from the Mishkan. Most mitzvot that we know of, they're not written in the Chumash. The rabbis derive them from their understanding of the verse. So that doesn't count as a mitzvah. It's not. It may be a law you have to observe, but it's not one of the 613 mitzvot. Anything derived from the third. Notice the Rambam's use of the number 13 again, right? The 13 hermeneutical principles that Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Kal Vachomer, Gzeira Shava, the 13 ways to interpret the Torah. There are 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. That's probably tied in because the God has 13 attributes. The Yud Gimel Midot, Hashem Hashem Al Racham Echanun. I don't think it's a coincidence, the Rambam's use of the number 13 in all these cases. But here the Rambam has 14, which is another number the Rambam writes, because the Rambam divides Mishnah into 14 books, the Yad HaChazaka, that's the second name, that strong hand. So the Rambam says there are 14 limiting principles. Hold on, I'm just going to drink for half a second. So his first limiting principle is anything that's a rabbinic mitzvah doesn't count. Hanukkah, Purim, it's not counted in the 613 mitzvah. And then he says, this is really obvious. I don't have to tell you this. Obviously, if we're talking about the mitzvah of the Torah, a mitzvah that's rabbinic can't count as one of the mitzvah of the Torah. But I have to tell you this because I'm going to say something not nice, but the Rambam doesn't use this word, but it is what he says. Because there was this idiot known as the Bahag, and he wrote a book of the 613 mitzvot. And the Rambam had no fear calling people like what he thought of them. And he wrote a book on the 613 mitzvot, this first one, and he included 7 rabbinic mitzvot, Chanukah and the Tilat Yadayim Purim. The guy's out of his mind. What's wrong with him? So I wouldn't even tell you this, but because he wrote that, I have to tell you that we don't count rabbinic mitzvot. So the Ramban comes to the defense of the Bahag. Rav Soloveitchik once gave a yortzeit shir, a 3-hour yortzeit shir, I think, explaining why the Bahag. Of course, the Rebbe would do this all the time. He doesn't agree with the Bahag. That's okay. But he's saying, where does the Bahag get this from? When he wasn't an idiot, God forbid, right? So the Ramban comes to the defense of the Bahag, also even though he doesn't agree with him. And the Ramban there does something fascinating, which is really, it's right at the beginning of Sefer Mitzvot. The Ramban says, is it really true that there's 613 mitzvot? I don't know if it's true. There's some obscure passage at the end of Makkah 6, but the rabbis never pick up on this. And maybe it's the view of one rabbi, Rav Similai, who says it's not one of the most famous rabbis. And the Gemara never says, when Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel argued, this one says it's a mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah. So the Gemara never says, well, if it's not a mitzvah, what mitzvah does he add to make 600? The Gemara never does that. So the Gemara, maybe they're not 613 mitzvot. I don't know. I don't know if it's true. And then the Rambam says, but you know what? Everybody knows there's 613, right? Everybody knows. I don't know. Why do you eat pomegranates on Rosh Hashanah, right? There's 613 seeds. Y'all heard that, Baba Maisa, right? Everybody knows that, Baba Maisa? There are the 613 seeds. Have you ever counted? I don't know where that comes from. The Gemara says we eat rimon ki we are malay mitzvot ki rimon. It's a beautiful idea. The Jewish people, you say hello to somebody, that's a mitzvah. It's not one of the 613 mitzvot, but you don't have to be one of the 613 to be mitzvah. So we are full of mitzvot like a pomegranate. That's why. So we want God on Rosh Hashanah. Remember, look how wonderful the Jewish people are. We do so many wonderful things, but it's not 613. But every pomegranate 613 seeds. Anyway, but it's amazing how we were all taught that stuff. I don't know where this comes from. Anyway, so there the Ramban comes and he defends the Bach. I just use that as an example of the peacemaker. The third one I'll say, and I find it interesting, so I elaborated on a lot. But the Rambam sort of accepts, and by the way, he disagrees with Rambam on 31 mitzvot. There are 31 differences in the 613 mitzvot. The most famous one, Asher, I'm sure will tell us, the most famous difference between the Rambam and the Ramban in 613 mitzvot is Asher. No,
Eretz Israel.
Exactly. Yishuv Eretz Israel. Is there an obligation
commandment or not?
Right. Is there an obligation to live in the land of Israel? According to the Rambam, it's not apparently the simple understanding of the Rambam, although you could argue on that too, is that the Rambam, it's not an obligation. There's no obligation to live in Israel. And the Ramban, the Rambam was the big Zionist about all the Rishonim, and he says it is a mitzvah. But there are 31 differences between the Rambam and the Ramban. The third play where he defends is the Rif. Rav Yitzchak Al-Fazi, who wrote the first code of Jewish law, the first summary of the Talmud, took out all the questions answered in the back of the Gemara. Rav Yitzchak from Fez, Rav Yitzchak Al-Fazi, he dies in 1038, and the Bala Meor writes, Balamor in Provence writes his critique of the Rif. The Rif was great, but he wrote his critique, and often very sharp. Rabbis often in the Middle Ages were very sharp in their disagreements, what they wrote. And the Ramban wrote the Milchamas Hashem, the War of God, Milchamas Hashem, to come to the defense of the Baal HaMaor, come to the defense of the Rif against the attacks of the Baal HaMaor. Okay, in the few minutes we have left, so I said the Ramban was a big believer in the midst of living in Israel, and so much of his commentary in the Chumash talks about the importance of living in Israel and the importance of the important mitzvah. Of course, how does the Ramban get to Israel? So he really gets to Israel because in 1263, we were just there. We're in Barcelona, where the debate was held between the Ramban over 4 days, I believe, the Ramban and Pablo Cristiani, who was a Jewish apostate. That's usually who debated Jews. In the Middle Ages, Jews were often forced to debate non-Jews, and there were two styles of debate. One was that the Talmud is ridiculous, and one was that Talmud proves Christianity. That's in a nutshell. Some debates were all the wrong things in Talmud, but the later debates, and this debate with Pablo Cristiani, was to demonstrate how the Talmud believes if you follow the Talmud properly, you'd become a Christian. The most famous line from that debate, as far as I know, is where Pablo Cristiani quotes the Talmudic passage that says this world is going to last for 6,000 years. 2,000 years tohu vavohu, 2,000 years of nothingness, 2,000 years of Torah. That's Avram was born in the year 1948, and according to some people, recognize God at the age of 52. So it's exactly 2,000 years. Torah begins with Avram, in a certain sense, 2,000 years. 2,000 years of Torah and 2,000 years of Yom HaMashiach. If you take 2,000 years from the birth of Avram, go for 2,000 years, you get just after around the time of Jesus. So this is proof that 2,000 years Jesus is the Mashiach. The 2,000 later years are the Messianic era. That's well, the Gemara has this statement, and the Ramban, what's his answer to this line? It's an amazing answer. Again, I'm not expert on it. The Ramban says, no, it's an Agadata. We don't have to follow every Agadata in the Gemara. We don't have to follow. It's an amazing answer. Did the Ramban believe what he said or not? Would he write it? But anyways, that's just one point. But the Ramban is considered by all to have won the debate or whatever. I will quote the line that I first saw this quoted by David Berger, of course, is the world's expert on Jewish-Christian relations. But King James, who was forced to have the debate, whatever, he was the moderator of the debate. He was really he was much better to the Jews than many other leaders. And he told the Ramban, you have total free reign. He was allowed to say whatever he wanted. Some of these debates, they didn't let you, they put like a gun to your head. You couldn't say what you wanted. So the Ramban was given free reign. He was given free speech. And when the debate ended, King James apparently said, I've never seen somebody who's wrong debate something so well. I've never seen somebody who's so wrong do something so right. And King James knew the Rambam was in trouble. He advised him. Apparently, he gave him money. He advised him to leave, and he went to Israel. And the Ramban in 1267 arrives in Israel, and he rewrites his commentary on the Chumash because he sees some of the geographical things he wrote was incorrect. I will. But the Ramban, of course, unlike the Rambam, was a great mystic, and a large part of his commentary that people generally skip when they learn the Ramban because they don't know what he's talking about. So they say Val derech hasod, and according to the secrets, right? The Ramban was a big Kabbalist, totally unlike the Rambam. And I'll just end here, and then I'll take questions, and then we'll have to take a look at the introduction of the Rambam. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was asked in this. If anybody's seen the book, it's translated into English. I actually have the Hebrew and the English. Mevakshe Panecha, it's called in Hebrew. I forget what it's called in English. Rav Sabato from Malay Adumim, one of the Rosh Yeshiva Malay Adumim, went to interview Rav Lichtenstein for 20 weeks. He went to his house once a week for a few months, and he sat with him for 3-4 hours every week. And he wrote, and then he did this interview, and then he published it in a book, and it's fascinating. First published in Hebrew, translated in English. I always like to quote when at the beginning of the book, he asked Rav Aaron, you went to Harvard University. What did you learn at Harvard? So Rav Aaron said, I was in Harvard 4 years. You know what he learned? Anybody know what the Rambam? It's such a beautiful answer. What Rav Lichtenstein said he learned at Harvard? No? Yocheved, you know what he learned at Harvard?
I read the book, but I forgot.
Life is complex. He learned at Harvard that life is complex. Such a beautiful answer. That's Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. He just got all the issues, women's, all the, hot button issues. So, but one of the I think it's in that book, but if not, but I know that they asked Rav Aaron if he was on a desert island and he could only take one book to read, what book would it be? And the Rav Lichtenstein said the Ramban on Chumash. That's the one book. Even though he's a Rambam and a brisker, the Rambam, the one book, if he could only have one book, the Ramban. Very fascinating. And when I was in Rav Lichtenstein's shir for 1 year, when I was in the Gris Kollel at YU, so he gave a 3-hour shir once a week. He did 1 hour Ramban on Chumash and a 2-hour Gemara shir. That's how Rav Lichtenstein taught us. We were, in the Smicha students of YU. But anyway, so he's a big fellow in the Ramban. Okay, we'll have to stop here. There's a lot of fascinating, so much more to discuss. But I really appreciate, you coming on totally off schedule on a Sunday morning and missing CBS News or whatever you missed, or the Olympics or the nice weather or whatever there is. So thank you very much. Just very, very quickly review the Rambam and the Ramban are two of the most important people who in our tradition. The Rambam was the Rambam. Nobody's like the Rambam. Lo kam Moshe ad Moshe, lo kam Moshe. The Rambam he changed the course of Jewish history with his principles of faith and his Mishnah Torah and so many ways. And the Rambam really, and he was very radical. He had very radical views in many ways, and we don't accept all his views, and that's okay. There's nobody's views we accept. We follow everything. And the 13 principles and his focus on intellectualism. Even his writing of the Mishnah Torah, which created great controversy. They burnt the first 4 chapters of the Mishnah Torah, where the Rambam downplays the study of Talmud and all these other things. That's another place we can look. I'll find that easier. And the Rambam didn't like Kollel. And of course, the Ramban, who was the great defender against the attacks of the Rambam, is very different in personality and approach. Really, these are two of the titans in Jewish history, both of whom are born in Spain, both of whom leave Spain. The Rambam really much earlier. The Rambam was a 10-year-old child, and the Ramban, at the end of his life, leaves Spain and makes his way to Israel. So, okay, we'll take it from there. And just let me see if any questions, then I'll take questions have, and then we'll take a look at Usher and you can see who's right. Okay, thank you. Okay, good. Elif Lemateh. Elif Lemateh is could be the 1,000 chapter of Rambam. It's in other words, that's why he did it. Is that the allusion to what Mashahu? I'm not sure what their last the allusion to Mashu. In other words, 1,000 is like a very round number, right? They took 1,000 from each tribe. I don't know, but I'm not sure. Yeah, there is a book, Elef Lecha Shlomo. That's a pasuk in Kohelet or something. That's Rav Shlomo Kluger wrote the book, 1,000 sort of Divrei Torah. He wrote. Okay, but yes, I don't know. Rambam desired to rewrite various of his works in Hebrew. Is that true? I don't know that. That he wanted to write in Hebrew. I don't know. Ibn Tibon, the famous letter, Shlomo Ibn Tibon, I think, or Shmuel Ibn Tibon, who was the translator of the Rambam. So he wrote to the Rambam when the Rambam's in Egypt. He says, I want to come and meet with you because I have some questions on the translation. What exactly do you mean? And the Rambam writes his very famous letter. That's very nice. You want to come, but I'm not going to meet you if you come. I don't have any time. And the Rambam writes his schedule. That's the famous letter where the Rambam writes, I get up in the morning and I go to the king's palace and I come home at night and there are 100 people waiting for me and I'm starving and I have no time to learn, no time to do anything except on Shabbat. So I'm sorry I won't be able to meet with you. I mean, it's unbelievable. The guy's going to travel from Spain to Egypt, asking questions on how to translate his book, and the Rambam says, I'm sorry, I don't have any time. It's like unbelievable. Okay, imagine if the Rambam didn't have to work as a doctor in the king's palace, what he could have accomplished. The whole thing is it's scary. Professor Wilson came to the US in 1903. Oh, yes, that's true. So who was I? No, so I'm thinking somebody else who survived the war, but thank you. Really, it's that early? 1903, that's okay. I stand corrected. It's interesting to note that even though he doesn't count living in Israel as a mitzvah, Rambam believes that it's a mitzvah chamura to learn Hebrew. No, it's a mitzvah kala. It's a mitzvah kala. Hevizar b'mitzvah kala kibechamura. So the Rambam says mitzvah. It says in Pirkei Avot, be as careful. There's some mitzvot are more important, some mitzvot are less important, but still we should take the less important words also seriously. So Rambam says that two mitzvah kala is simchat haregel. Very interesting, to rejoice on the festival and to live and to speak Hebrew. The Rambam writes it's better to live in Israel in a city that's full of adulterers and live in chutzar. The Rambam says a lot of very positive things about Israel. So it's not that, but apparently in this, and this is how Rav Moshe Feinstein paskined, and many great people paskin that there is no obligation to live in Israel. It's a nice thing to do. It's a good thing. And you can do other mitzvah, it's second mitzvah, but there is no technical obligation. Today, many people, obviously the religious Zionist world doesn't accept that view or doesn't agree with that view, but many, many people said that. I will say Rav Schechter wrote a fantastic article in the first RJJ journal when it came out, the Journal of Halakha and Contemporary Society, Midget Yishuv. So he spends a lot of the article, the truth of the Avnei Nezer. The Avnei Nezer was the Sukkot Shavuot Rebbe. He dies in 1910 or something like that. And the Eglei Tal, the Avnei Nezer. So they asked the Avnei Nezer, a Hasidic Rebbe, how come none of the Rebbe moved to Israel? Why did you all move to Israel? So he says, mitzvah Yishuv Haaretz. Doesn't mean to live in Israel. That's not what the mitzvah is. It's to settle the land. If you're sitting and then learning in Kolo, that's no Yishuv Haaretz means to work on the kibbutz, or to invest in the economy. In other words, you can live in America and invest in the economy. It's also Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So he writes Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. He says in the 1800s, you're going to go there. It's under Turkish rule. And somebody's going to have to send you money from chutz la'aretz. There's no industry. That's not Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. You're not building up that. Very interesting. And that was his, obviously it's much different today than it was back then. But it's not even the mitzvah to live in Israel. Doesn't mean that necessarily. It's not so much whether you're physically present. I mean, it means that you are building up the land. So in the modern world, you really can't build up the land, even if you don't live there. You can have, obviously it's different if you live there and there are other reasons, but you can do a partial fulfillment of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, buying Israeli bonds, I don't know, investing in the Israeli stock market, whatever, doing research for an Israeli startup, helping technology, whatever. So it's interesting. Okay, any other questions?
Tell it to the 1,000 French people who have to go because their country is finished,
Sorry?
The French people, now, last week, 800, tell it to them. They're up against a wall. They knew where they had to go,
I mean, listen, okay, I'm not getting what's going on in the world today. Yeah, of course. I'm not, listen, I don't know what to say. It's I can tell you I don't know if I don't think I mentioned it here. I don't think I mentioned in my class last week or 2 weeks ago, but I'm telling you there is, as the rabbi in Vienna said, there's much less antis in the parts of Europe we visited, Budapest, Prague, Vienna, much less anti-Semitism there than in North America. The hostages signs are all over the place, all in the Jewish quarter. Not one of them is defaced. It's totally. The rabbi in Vienna said there's pretty much zero anti-Semitism there. The kids walk around in their kippahs. Nobody's afraid. There'll be no protest in front of shuls. Yeah, you have some people who protest here and there, but there's not like it is here. And it was very interesting what he said, that we in North America always think, oh, it's much worse in Europe. He says it's much worse in North America than in Europe. I don't know. I live in Toronto. I'm sure many of you have seen all the reports about the anti-Semitism here. It's not that I feel it day to day, but you know, a lot. But it's you don't hear those stories going on in Vienna and in Prague and these places. It's whatever. I don't know what to say. Yes, France. You hear? I've never been to France, but I don't know what to say. But I'm
Rabbi, I don't know what that rabbi said, but there are hardly any Jews there now. That is the truth.
Vienna, 7,500 Jews, 24 shuls, 5-day schools. I wouldn't say there are hardly any Jews there. The Jews are quite. I was there. The Jewish Museum has a huge Israeli flag, like in the center of town. There's a huge Israeli flag there. It's not a lot of Jews, but it doesn't take a lot of Jews to have anti-Semitism. The relationship between the number of Jews and anti-Semitism, I don't know if it exists. So yes, there are not a lot of Jews. He did tell us, the rabbi, he's the chief rabbi of Vienna. He grew up there. He learned in Israel for many years. He learned in Mir, and he's an interesting guy. Very
his name?
I forget his name, actually. I'm sorry, I forget his name. But when he spoke to our group, and
he's an old man.
No.
He's an older man.
No, 40s. I would say he's in his 40s, probably. No, he's not an older man. He's very classically dressed with a Hamburg, a very nice. He looks very, nice, whatever, dignified. And he says he has interfaith meetings with the Muslims to talk and they discuss. But he comes from this sort of more yeshivish world, but is a very interesting fellow. And he says today that about half of the kids stay in Vienna. Like the kids get married, and even their spouses are not from Vienna. A lot of them move to Vienna. Says this is pretty recent, but in recent years, the kids are staying in Vienna. They see a real future there. So it's very interesting. Very interesting. I'm just when he finished his talk, Mark came over to me. Mark Spear said, "This guy would get thrown out of every modern Orthodox shul in North America. If he came to North American spoken modern, they would throw him out." He talked about cooperating, working with the Muslims. Don't worry, anti-Semitism. That message doesn't go over the modern Orthodox community in North America. But it was very interesting what he said. Yocheved, yes.
Yeah, so I just want to share that I heard Rav Soloveitchik say in a lecture on Chumash, where he was planning on studying and explain the Ramban, that the Rambam made, well, I don't know if he used the word made a mistake, but he said because of all the philosophy that he studied, that colored his thinking, and he wasn't able to be truly creative, as opposed to the Ramban, who did not have that cluttering up his mind, and therefore he was able to interpret the Chumash
I never heard that in the name of
manner.
Of Rav Soloveitchik. I heard that in the name of the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon, I think, writes it in his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch. I don't remember exactly. I have to look it up. I'm pretty sure it's in the Bir HaGra in the Shulchan Aruch, that because the Rambam studied philosophy, it messed them up a little bit.
So it was very interesting to hear this from the Rav, who is the big Rambam.
Right. The Rav believes in the study of philosophy, too.
Yeah, I know, but for whatever it is,
Steve, one of the reasons, when they called back, then it's see, my uncle didn't see that famous story with the excerpts of the Torah Mima. The nephew of Nitziv wrote a book on his uncle. My uncle didn't see, and in that book he writes that the Rambam made a lot of mistakes. There are a lot of, all the contradictions in the Rambam. He read the Rambam made a lot of mistakes because he didn't learn with a chavrusa. So like me, thank God I have you guys to come and correct my mistakes, I hope. If I say something that you think is wrong, please tell me, right? But when you don't have a chavrusa, if nobody tell you. So that's what he said. So you can imagine not everybody like that. like that. Somebody asked me, are there many Jews in Europe supporting the Palestinian cause? He didn't say anything like that. I don't know. Listen, he said there are always going to be extremists there, but he didn't say that was a real issue. But I can tell you in Prague and Budapest, these places, the amount of non-Jews who visit the Jewish sites, you go to Prague, there are long lineups to get into the shul. It's part of the whole tourist thing in Prague. 90% of people, 95%, I know, are non-Jews. They come to the shuls. They're beautiful shuls. They want to see, they go to the Maharal's grave. They go to the Jewish cemetery. It's very fascinating. It's really, it's nice. What can I tell you? It's not, I still listen. I'm always, I don't want to say I'm optimist. I believe, the Beit Tfilah L'chol Amim. We have a lot in common. We can have a lot in common with non-Jews. We have to work with non-Jews, and we need world peace. Talked about when I started the Lubavitcher Rebbe talking about the Messianic era based on the Rambam, Shiva Malchut. We have to work with non-Jews. We can't. Jewish people cannot only do what they, worry about themselves. So we have a lot of partners.
Yeah. Rabbi Kelman, may I
yes, sure,
jump
absolutely.
into this thing?
Yeah.
Okay, at the risk of being whatever, not
there's no risk here. We're safe space here. You can say whatever.
Okay, we'll see.
Everything goes.
We'll see. Okay, so just very, very quickly, what's happening in America is the same as what's happening in Western Europe. Okay, these are different countries. This is England, this is France, this is Italy. It's the traditional Western culture. This is not something I've invented, but it's the Islamist invasion that has changed the demography in many of these countries.
So somebody said that, I mentioned it in my shir yesterday on Shabbos afternoon, so somebody came over to me, maybe I should turn off our recording now, and said that, you know what, I said, because these countries, all people are all white. They don't have the immigrants. I don't know.
It's not the white part. It's not the white part.
That's what somebody said to me.
No. It's the very different Islamist philosophy, which is we all should become Islamists or Islam. That's what it is. And in America, it's been confirmed that Iran is the one that has been subsidizing all these things. Okay, so
for years they've been investing in the universities and the UAE. All these countries invest at these Middle Eastern things. All the professors. Yeah, I don't know. It's not. What can I tell you? It's not my. I don't know enough about this. It's a problem. Listen. What can we tell you? Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Not that it's so wonderful in Israel now either. But
as my uncle used to say in his years ago, because we were the ones who left Israel and the rest stayed, he says, we don't want people to come when they're in a box. It's hard. We're very difficult people, but you're with family. And that was the point. That's our family in Israel.
Right. Okay. Let's just take a very quick look if we can. Everybody can leave. I don't want to really go on too much longer, but I promised Asher, let's find if I can just take a look at his introduction in the Rambam, if I can find it. Okay, so we go. I don't know if they have it here.
If you want, I'm happy to be mevater on that in return for an entirely different comment.
Okay.
But it's not entirely different comment. It's very much in keeping, but everybody constantly uses the word philosophy. The concept of philosophy, when the Rambam uses that term, he doesn't mean philosophical systems like Plato and the philosophy of Aristotle and so on and so forth. The word philosophy at that time meant physical science. I'm a chemist and a physicist by training. When the Rambam is using the language philosophy, he is talking about physical science. And in his terms, you can see this if you continue reading in Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah. There were two realms of physical science, and only two, and he expounds them. One was astronomy. And he quotes in the introduction to the Sefer HaMitzvot directly. But when he's talking about the Galgalim and all of those things, he's quoting Claudius Ptolemaeus, who lived and wrote his famous book about 200 ACE in Cairo, although he was a Greek. And so that's one area of science, philosophy, and he expounds it in detail. Sit there and try and read it, and because our mind is in the modern, we have modern knowledge, quote unquote, which is relatively recent. It's only about 400 years old, but you can't understand it because it's all geocentric. That's one side. The second side is the natural physical sciences. When he's quoting Aristotle, that's what he's quoting. Aristotle's book is basically his lectures notes, which one of his students wrote down. He never wrote a book, his lecture notes. But that he is summarizing Greek knowledge of the physical world. And earth, air, fire, water, that's their fundamentals of chemistry and physics. That's all they knew. And the Rambam looks upon that as, well, that's the science of the world. And as long as we don't know anything different, so that's Niflaot Ribbono Shel Olam. He never writes a commentary.
I agree with you that the Rambam does talk in the first 4 chapters of Yisrael Torah, a lot of physical stuff. But I don't, again, I'm not an expert, but I do believe, no, he also talks about philosophy the way we mean it in our conception of God, and then philosophical speculation. And that's less in the halakha and more in the guide. The Rambam was clearly, as I understand, my limited knowledge, the Rambam did have a great interest also, not in negation to what you're saying, but I think he also did believe in what we would call classic philosophical speculation. And when the Rambam says you have to know God, well, he's not meaning that. I don't think he means that in a physical sense. He means that in a philosophical, intellectual sense. So, right, but we'll leave it at that. I'm the expert. Naomi, I think, thank you for that. They'll take a look at the Rambam later, some other time. But yeah, inside Naomi,
I think it's referred to as physics and metaphysics.
Correct. That's what they refer to it in physics and metaphysics.
Is the physical, and the metaphysics is the philosophical, is the way they understood it.
Yeah, that's what comes later on. He says that. He says when he talks about Maseh Merkava, that's what he was referring to. But he's not referring, that's metaphysics. When he talks about Maseh Merkava, that's metaphysics. But that's not philosophical system.
But he has both. I think the Rambam does have both. But let Naomi, I think, had her hand up, right?
Yeah, my questions are not so philosophical.
That's okay. I'm also, that's my philosophy is not my field either. So,
so number one, 2 questions. When the Ramban wrote his more radical statements, did he write them as a young man or when he was older? Do we have any idea?
So we know the Perush HaMishnayos he wrote earlier in his life. The Mishnah Torah was written probably when he was in his 40s and 50s. I mean, I don't know how it took him a number of years. I don't remember to write it. He went over it. There is a lot of talk. What happens when there's a contradiction between the Perush HaMishnayos and the Mishnah Torah? We generally follow what it says in the Mishnah Torah. But when did he write the Morning Nevuchim? That's a good question. I should know the answer to that, and I don't offhand. But
he wrote it later.
Yeah, I was about to say I think it's a little bit later, but I don't remember exactly when he wrote it.
It's written as letters to his Talmid Muvhak.
Right, but I don't know how old he was when he wrote that. I just don't know. I should know, and maybe if I should know, he can let us know. I don't know exactly, but I know he wrote the Perush HaMishnayos was written much earlier than the Mishnah Torah in terms of some of his, and the letters he wrote at various times. People wrote him letters. He would respond. Igeret Teiman, Igeret Hashma, different letters. Yeah.
And my second question is, from a practical point of view, the Ramban made Aliyah and was successful and stayed. The Rambam went to Eretz Yisrael and left.
Correct.
So maybe that's what influenced one to make it a mitzvah and the other not to make it a mitzvah.
Well, I'm assuming the Rambam wrote this before he went to Israel, but I understand what you're saying. In other words, because I mean, yeah, that's an interesting point. You're saying because he left, had he been a mitzvah, he would have stayed. I don't know. It was very hard. It was very, you couldn't stay. I mean, people, there's one of the there's a famous passage in Tosfot quoting Rav Chaim Cohen that there's no mitzvah to live in Israel because it's too dangerous. That's you in the Middle Ages. He writes this in the Middle Ages. That was people talk about that. He writes that doesn't apply if it's in the middle. You can't just go to Israel. Now we know about many of the French Kosovists also made Aliyah. There were groups of Jews who made Aliyah, but it was very hard. The big settlement was, of course, after the Spanish expulsion of Yosef Kara, the Ari, of Shlomo Alkovitz, that whole group who lived in Sfat, but also didn't last. Also, it came to an end, and then it started again in the 1800s, what we have today. But that was just I don't know that where the Ramban had already written about his stuff in Israel before he moved to Israel in 1267. So okay. Anyway, Menachem Leibtag is speaking in 35 minutes, a regular share. And if you haven't registered yet for our Tisha B'Av program, I'm sure you all got the email. I'm going to send out another one. Please do so soon. 8 hours from 11, at least in American time. And it's nice. We have two Israelis. One asked to speak before the fast end, and one asked to speak after the fast end. I said that's fine as long as you don't eat when you're online. But otherwise, you can do that. So please listen. We should have the month of Av. Tonight's Rosh Chodesh. Should be a month of joy. What can we say enough of this morning and Av? We should have turn to Sason v'Simcha. The fast of the 4th, 5th, 7th, and 10th month should be days of joy. And okay, but anyways, Rabbi, I'm going to turn off the thing so you have to re-enter just everything for class. And I want to thank you again for all the people who came up. Regular schedule. And this Friday, please God, we'll be back to our regular sitter in the middle of Slach Lanu. Okay, have a great day, a great week. We should hear good news. Thank you.
Thank you. Toda Rabba.
Okay,
Toda Rabba.
Toda. And thank you, Usher.